Welcome back, friends, to another episode of Build a Lot Acres. In today's episode, me and my son Brett here are going to discuss the tools that every wood burner should own. Now, a lot of these tools are going to be more geared towards those that want to get their own firewood, whether it be from cutting wood in the forest floor or from cutting trees down and processing it into firewood. So if you are one of those people that ends up buying your firewood pre-split, or that you buy logs, get delivered to your house, a lot of these tools may not apply to you, but it's still good general knowledge to know. So please stay tuned. All right, so first and foremost, we're going to talk about safety. Cutting wood can be extremely dangerous, and safety is one of the most important things that you can have. So the first thing we're going to touch on is helmets. Now they have a variety of styles. On the left there, you'll see a full brim helmet, which is metal, called a skull cap. And then you'll have some plastic helmets like the other two you see here. And these are going to be obviously good for keeping your head from getting hit from falling branches, or maybe something swinging, or even a chain falling. There's going to be a number of things that could happen when you don't wear your helmet. And you don't want to be caught without one. So we'll move on to some hearing protection. They have a number of styles with different decibel ratings. The pair on the right there, the yellow pair, is my favorite, mainly because it has built-in music. I can play radio stations or different music while I'm cutting or splitting or doing whatever, and it'll kind of pass the time a little quicker. So we have some safety glasses.
Those are as important.
We have some felling wedges. Now the yellow ones are new. I haven't tried those yet. I actually got them as a Secret Santa present from a member of a forum that I'm on. And the nice thing I like about these that you can see is they have a raised, kind of a raised section where when you hit them in, they're gonna bite in and they're not gonna slip out. A lot of times when you use felling wedges, they'll kick out. They'll kick out from their cut as you're hitting them in. So that's nice. Comes with a nice mesh carrying bag. And then we're gonna have some gloves. I personally like leather gloves. They also make them in different types of materials, but they're gonna keep your hands from getting dirty or scratched up, or maybe even some sap on your hands or scratches or different things like that. So the last of the safety items we're gonna talk about is gonna be chainsaw chaps and a first aid kit. The chainsaw chaps are just basically gonna go over your pants. They're gonna have a protective material that if you would accidentally hit the chainsaw on your leg while it was running, it would prevent you from getting seriously hurt or possibly worse. And the first aid kit, I would recommend just a basic kit with maybe some gauze, pads, maybe a tourniquet, just stuff that's going to keep you safe long enough and alive to get to serious help or maybe the hospital. All right, so Brett's going to guide us through some hand tools. We're going to start off with some saws and hatchets and axes and mauls and go through some of the differences.
So this one right here, this is just a regular all-purpose saw. It's good for cutting off small branches and other things similar to that. It isn't good for bigger stuff, but if you're just clearing out a lot of brush, this will normally work fine. Next is this. It's almost like a machete.
I believe they call that a brush axe. It's a Fiskars brush axe.
And what it is really good for is swinging and just quickly taking care of a lot of small brush.
Or saplings, or
saplings.
You could also actually use them to split small wood or kindling. They have a fairly thick blade, much thicker than your typical machete is going to have.
So next we have two of these more conventional hatchets. And they're going to be good for splitting your smaller wood or your easier to split wood. Next, we'll talk about this. This is a regular conventional axe. And this is going to be good for a lot of your heavier splitting jobs. It's going to be a good all-purpose axe. You're going to use it a lot if you're dealing with wood a lot, as we do on Build a Lot Acres.
Now that's an X25 from Fiskars. They also make an X27, which is essentially the same. I believe it just has a longer handle. So if you're a taller person, I'd say maybe over 6 foot or 6'2" or taller, you'd probably benefit from having the longer X27.
And then the last axe is a maul. And these are cool because one half, as you can see, is a regular axe, but then the other half is a sledgehammer. And so these are good for just those huge pieces that you're going to want the most weight possible to swing with. And also if you're doing the felling wedges, then it's going to be a lot easier to hit them in with this because you can just hit it with the back of this. I've also seen these. We have one at my house where it's one of these, but it's the size of a hatchet, and that's pretty cool. But I think that the bigger ones you're going to get a lot more use out of as comparative to.
And then the last tool there would also be a maul. That's a Fiskars Isocore. I believe the red maul that Brett just demonstrated and the Isocore Fiskars maul are both around 8-pound heads.
Yes.
So those are, or it might be 8 pounds total with a 6-pound head, I forget, but they're around 8 pounds each. So next we will move on to the loppers. These would be nice for getting rid of small saplings. If you wanted to maybe clear the bottom of a tree to get it ready for felling and you wanted to get some small scrub brush out of the way. So you had a good escape route. That's going to come in handy. You can have some steel wedges. These are going to be used for splitting wood. The one thing I would caution you is always make sure you wear your safety glasses when you're driving these in and keep the heads ground down. As you can see, mine need to be ground down. They get mushroomed over after a while from repeatedly striking them with a hammer or a maul or whatnot. So you want to make sure you grind those extra areas down so you don't have shrapnel that could get lodged into your skin or your eye or somewhere else. So then we're going to have the log tongs. These come in a variety of sizes. Typically they're between 8 and 12-inch openings. These are really nice for grabbing rounds of wood and either picking them up to the splitter or just carrying them over to the trail from the woods. I highly recommend these. These are very nice to have.
They are awesome to have.
They're one of the items that a lot of people may not think of, but they're probably one of the most used items that I have. And then last here, we're going to have what they call a pulp hook or a hay hook. I personally don't use this very often. I just find that it's hard to get it to stick in the wood. I think it would be better for hay or something softer. It might be useful for pine, but a lot of the woods I process are more like a red oak or something harder and denser. So I really don't use that one that often. That's not one that I would necessarily recommend buying, but I would definitely recommend buying the log tongs. So we'll move on to some more somewhat specialty items. So the first item closest to us, you're going to see, is called a picaroon. Sometimes it'll be called hookaroon. So essentially what these are for is it has a very sharp hook point. What you're going to use that for is if you wanted to unload a pickup bed or a trailer, you needed to extend your reach and grab a log or a round or a piece of wood and pull it closer to you. That's when that's going to really come in handy. And they also make those in a variety of lengths. I've seen them as short as 12 inches and I've seen them as long as 48 or 60 inches. I've seen homemade ones even longer. I will say if you wanted to use it more for grabbing wood off the ground and picking it up to a splitter or something of that nature, you'd be better off with maybe a shorter one. I know my brother has I believe it's a Fiskars hookaroo, and it's much shorter. It's maybe 12 or 15 inches in length, and it's much handier for picking up wood off the ground. This one's more for unloading beds or trailers. So then we're going to have a cant hook. So these are called a cant hook because they were originally designed for moving cants. A cant is basically a log that has been sawed on the four sides, so it's more of a rectangle. So in a mill, you would use a cant hook to roll and turn the cants in different directions to get them ready for milling. What I would use these for is to roll large logs to keep my saw chain out of the ground. So if I cut a log 90% of the way through, and then I'll take and roll it with this cant hook, and I'll finish the cut, and my saw stays out of the dirt.
Yes, there have been numerous times that between me and my father that one of us has been using them while the other one's cutting the wood.
So I have a log right 60-inch cant hook, which I think is a good general size. Some of the wood I deal with is up to 4 feet or more in diameter. That's really pushing the limit because the jaw opening only goes so far. But I think anywhere from a 4-foot to a 5-foot cant hook is the best size. They also make these up to 78-inch, the mega hook, which is a very large log right cant hook. That would be more for really large rounds. And then you'll see I also have a homemade one. I've actually found that in the woods. So you can find these a lot of times at yard sales and flea markets or estate sales, sometimes very inexpensive. And the last thing I want to talk about with the cant hooks is they also make a PV, so instead of having this hook, it's going to have a straight, pointy end. Now, they essentially are similar tools, but the PV was designed for river drives. And what I mean by that is when they did river logging, they would use the PV to keep logs separated that were floating in the water and guide them to different areas. So for firewood purposes, I would recommend the cant hook. I think the PV would be a little less useful. It would still work, but it wouldn't be as useful as the cant hook. So we'll talk about some measuring tools. You're going to see that most people are going to want to have a fairly consistent firewood length, especially if you're going to be selling firewood. People are going to want it to be fairly close and consistent. And also just visually looks better in your pile when all the pieces are close by in size. You don't want some pieces being 4 or 5 inches longer than others. While it may not matter to your stove or for burning, it just looks better. And I personally prefer to measure out my wood. I do 20-inch lengths. You can see there's a number of ways to do that. We have a magnetic stick that you will put on your bar, on the side of your chainsaw bar. I'll demonstrate that real quick for you. So let's say I was cutting with this MS-250 steel. We're just going to stick it on there. When I come up to the end of the marker there, I know I have a 20-inch long piece of wood. Now, the positives of this style are they're fairly inexpensive. You just need a magnet and a stick. I made that one myself. The negatives that I found, it may just be due to the magnet shape. They don't tend to stay on. They fall off easy. I think if you had a larger diameter magnet that was even shallower, I think it would probably work better. But my particular magnet, I had that one on hand, so I just used it. Another method is going to be the PVC conduit pipe. You see, those are just electrical PVC conduits, and then they have an eye bolt threaded in the ends. So you basically hook that eye bolt over the end of the log, and then you'll see the black markings every 20 inches. So you just put on your log, mark it, and then you're on your way. Now, what I don't like about these is if your log isn't perfectly straight, if you have any curvature to the wood, they don't tend to stay on as well. And I find myself nicking the plastic with my saw quite a bit. So I would say that's probably
two biggest issues with them. Yes.
Not my favorite issue, not my favorite way to go. And then the last way would be to get a flexible measuring tape. This one's a 50-foot tape. They also come in 100 feet or different lengths. The nice thing is you want something that's flexible so you can wrap it around the wood and follow the curvature of the wood, and it's not going to fall off or get in the way. So you basically would just measure out and then take some sidewalk chalk or something of that nature, and you're going to mark every 16 inches, 20 inches, 24 inches, whatever lengths you want to cut your firewood to. That's my personal favorite method. You're already going to have the tape for other things. So it's really just a matter of stealing some of your kids' sidewalk chalk and you're good to go. All right, so let's talk about ways to pull out wood. Now, chains are probably going to be the most common and the go-to method. There's a variety of chains you can get. I would say if you have a smaller tractor, like maybe a Kubota BX or a Mahindra Max or something of that nature, you can probably get away with a 1/4-inch chain, maybe a 5/16 chain. You're going to want, there's different grade chains. You're going to want something like a grade 70 transport chain, which is what we have here, the gold chain. I would recommend getting what they call a choker hook. As you can see here, one of the hooks is designed to go over the chain and slip over it, and the other one is meant to hook on an individual link. Typically, these chains are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 feet long. I carry a couple of them on my tractor whenever I go out cutting. They come in handy for pulling logs, for skidding, for pulling over a tree, or lifting a roundups, different things of that nature. You're also going to have a pulling rope. These are more meant for pulling a tree over by hand. You're not going to want to hook this to a machine unless you have a really heavy duty rope. This one's not that heavy duty. This one's for hand pulling. If I have a smaller tree that I want to influence a certain direction to fall, then I'll use this rope. And then the last item, which this is not something I recommend getting. I haven't used this very much. This is actually a grapple that's meant to hook onto a chain. It looks cool, it looks impressive, but I found that it tends to slip off of the tree when you go to pull it. The choker chain works much better in my opinion, and it's cheaper. So I would not recommend getting one of these. This might be good for lifting pieces of wood around up to a splitter maybe. But as far as skidding logs, I don't particularly recommend.
Yes, unless you're like working at a mill or somewhere where you're dealing with a lot of huge trees all at the time. This is not a good place to get. It's not a good investment.
So now let's talk about some saws, everyone's favorite. So there's a variety of saws here. You can see I have saws ranging from 45 cc's all the way up to 79 cc's. So I have an MS 250 steel. That's more of a homeowner saw. You can see in the front left corner here. That's a 45 cc saw. It's a 3 horsepower engine. It has a 16-inch bar. That's a good saw for a beginner, someone who hasn't cut a lot of wood before, or if you're only going to cut
Small stuff.
1 to 2 cords a year and you're only cutting smaller wood, that's a good saw to have. I think they only retail for around $300, give or take. So it's not a huge investment compared to some other saws you can get. So here we have the Dolmar 5100. That's 51 cc's. That's approximately a 3.9 horsepower saw. I believe it has a 17 or an 18-inch bar. It has what Dolmar calls a 17-inch bar. Now that's going to be quite a bit faster, even though it looks similar in size to the 250. That's going to be a much faster saw. So we'll move on to the Stihl MS 460. That's a 77 cc saw, 6 horsepower. It's a very good size saw. That's going to be more for large wood. That is a 25-inch bar, which most other companies would call 24, but Stihl calls them 25. So that's going to be for your bigger wood or your bigger felling jobs. And then lastly, with a 32-inch bar, is
Big Bertha.
the Dolmar 7900. That's a 6.3 horsepower saw. It's got 79 cc's. That's very similar to the Stihl 460. I just prefer to have 2 because they have different size bars on them. I would say if you've never had a saw before, stick with something in the 50 to 60 cc class. That's going to be a good first time saw, and it's not going to be overpowering to most people. But they also have what they call a 2-saw plan, which means that you're going to have a backup saw. If you're going to go for that route, I would recommend having a 50 cc saw and then a 70 to 80 cc saw. One will be good for big bucking jobs and felling, and the other one will be better for limbing and small bucking. So if you're going to have one saw, I would stick closer to the 60 cc class. And if you're going to have 2, I would probably go somewhere in the 50 cc for one of them, and then 70 to 80 for the second saw. Now, as far as transporting your wood, there's a couple options you can go. You can use either a wheelbarrow, as you see here, or a garden cart. I prefer the carts. You can load more wood in them. This cart will hold even quite a bit. This cart will hold at least twice what this 2-wheel wheelbarrow will hold, and it's easier to pull. Usually I'll put all my tools in there for the day. I'll bring it over to the woods, and then I can leave the tractor with the grapple on it, and I don't have to worry about putting the bucket on it just to transport tools. They make these in a number of sizes. They make them all the way from around 4 cubic feet to up to 15 or 20 cubic feet. This particular model is rated at 1,500 pounds, and it's really one of the heavier duty carts that Gorilla offers.
Yes. And then up next, we have this 2-wheeled wheelbarrow. And my father does not like using this. If you look inside, you can see one of the biggest reasons is because it cracks, because it's plastic. It is not metal, and so it tends to crack a lot. And then also, as he previously mentioned, it is a lot easier for it to be overflowing with wood, or for him to like accidentally say put it down or whatever when he's moving wood, because you can fit so much less in it. And because it has 2 moving wheels, not 4.
So next we're going to talk about vices, and then we'll be moving outside. Thanks for sticking with us. I know it's not the most exciting of topics, but if you want to burn wood, these are good things to know. Now we have what they call a stump vise, as you can see in the orange there. You're going to pound that into a stump, and then you can sharpen your saw in the field, and you don't have to drive all the way back to your shop. Those are nice because they're nice and small and portable. They're easy to hit in. The thing I don't like is that certain saws, depending on how big your dogs are, sometimes this chain can tend to rub. You don't have a very big opening from the screw to the bottom. So certain saws are going to want to have the chain touching the bottom of the dog, if that makes sense. So you can't always turn your chain while it's in the stump vise, which is why I like a regular vise, as you see here. I've designed and built this one to fit into a receiver hitch, so if I have a tractor receiver and a 3-point hitch, or a truck or anything of that nature, or maybe if you had a mule or something like that, a side-by-side, you could put it in a receiver hitch, and then you have a lot better vise than the cheaper stump vise that you see there. So I would recommend, to start off with, probably get a stump vise, but in the long run, I would recommend figuring out a way to get a smaller regular vise to work for you. So one of the tools that is most handy but also most expensive is going to be a tractor. This particular tractor is a Coyote NX 4510. It's a 45 horsepower tractor. It's rated to lift 2,761 pounds, about 9 feet in the air. I use this all the time, whether it be with a bucket, forks, grapple. I use it to skid logs. I use it to pull trees over. Use it to transport wood. For firewood related chores, there's not much that can beat a tractor. So if you do have a machine to tow a trailer, such as a tractor or maybe a side-by-side or a pickup, a trailer can be really handy. This particular trailer is a super tilt. It's rated at 2,000 pounds. It's a Canadian manufacturer. This particular one dumps. So you'll see the hydraulic hose there. What you'll do is hook that up to your rear hydraulic port in your tractor, and this whole trailer will actually dump. So it's really handy. I've had this thing overflowing with fresh cut red oak and hickory and different heavy woods, and it performs flawlessly.
This is another really good trailer for if you're using a tractor without a bucket or a front loader in general. That this is going to be a lot easier to use because you don't necessarily have to buy a front bucket or a front loader or whatever have you. You can just use this and load it in by hand. It'll be slower, but it will still get the job done.
Now, if you're not going to have a grapple and you want something a little more versatile, not such a dedicated tool, I would recommend getting a pair of forks. There's two different styles here. You can see the style to the left. The gray style goes on the quick attach of my tractor in place of a bucket. But once you have that on, you can use that to pick up logs, pick up rounds. You can carry IVC totes. There's a number of things you can do with it. I currently have a box that I made that I put on it. I use this box to pick myself up if I want to work on something higher up, like maybe change a light bulb or cut branches off or trim some things or put up Christmas lights. There's a number of things that I've used this for. A lot of them have nothing to do with firewood, but I just figured I'd talk about it while we're doing the video. And then we're going to have a set of 3-point forks. These are much cheaper than the front forks, but they're also not as handy. You can't lift as high and they don't dump. At least these ones don't. So these I think are rated for 2,000 pounds. So these will still pick up a full IBC tote or a big log, and they don't really cost all that much money. I think I paid around, they were around $199 or so when I bought them.
The other cool thing about these 3-point forks is that my dad's other tractor, second biggest tractor, is Ford 1700. He commonly puts them on the back of the Ford to then be able to have the front forks or grapple on the Coyote and move logs around with that. And then you'll put a smaller box on the back on this, and then puts this on the back of the Ford. And all of his tools, everything like that, he loads all of it onto the 3-point forks.
So I think the 3-point forks there are from AgriFab. So if you want to check those out, the AgriFab often sends out catalogs in the mail. You can also find them online. So I think the last specialty kind of tool we're going to talk about was a tractor grapple. Now they make these in a number of different styles and sizes. This particular grapple is a work saver. It's a 60-inch wide grapple. These come in handy for grabbing logs, whether it be to unload a trailer, to load a log, pick up logs. They also come in handy for digging up roots and pushing over trees. There's a number of things that I use this grapple for. I would say if I had to pick between the grapple and the forks, if I could only have one, I would probably only want the forks. I think they're a little more versatile for different things, and they still can do a lot of the jobs the grapple does, but the grapple can't do a lot of the jobs the forks can do. So that would be the last of the tractor implements that we're going to talk about. Anything safety related, the helmets,
Necessity.
the glasses,
Necessity.
all of the safety related, the chaps, all of the safety stuff that we showed you is a necessity. There's no way you want to be cutting wood or gathering wood without those.
It is dangerous and
So-
stupid.
So yes, absolutely get any of the safety stuff. As far as the last, we'll cut off some of the more extreme on both ends stuff. Anything tractor related, obviously you don't have to have. You don't need a tractor. We have 21 acres, so we need an easier way to get wood. I don't have the time or the energy to use hand tools to get all my wood. I burn about 8 cords a year, and it would just be unrealistic or unfeasible to do without the aid of a tractor. But the tractor stuff is by far just a nice to have. It's not
Yes.
even should have. It's more of a nice to have.
Yes, it's more of a want and less of a need.
What else do we have?
In terms of chainsaws, you're gonna want probably one of them at least.
I would say one 50 to 60 cc chainsaw would be a need if you cut your own wood. Anything above and beyond that would be a nice to have.
Yes. In terms of your like hand saws, your axes, I'd say probably just one half decent axe is all you're gonna need. And like some small hatchets or some mauls or other more specialty equipment is more of a want.
I would agree. You're gonna need at least one axe, and I would recommend one handsaw. You don't necessarily need multiple of each like I have. I just have them because I've collected them, have them over the years. But I would say one good axe and one decent handsaw. It could be a folding handsaw, it could be a fixed blade like I have. But I would recommend having one of each of those as a need. And then anything above and beyond that would be a nice to have.
Yes. In terms of the gorilla cart and the wheelbarrow.
A lot of that's going to depend on what you have to tow it.
Yes.
If you have no machine to tow it, you're going to have some way to move wood. You're not going to want to be carrying all the wood under your arm. That's going to get old quick. I would say if you're only going to get one, get the gorilla cart or something. It doesn't have to be gorilla cart brand. It could be any other utility cart brand. But if I had to recommend either a cart or a wheelbarrow for firewood, I would recommend a cart. It holds more wood. It's easier to pull.
It's just going to be better, smoother, easier.
You can put all your firewood tools in it. It's just altogether more convenient. Now, as far as the kind of specialty hand tools that we saw, like the pickaroon and the cant hook, a lot of this is going to depend on how much wood you cut and how you get it. If you're going from a standing tree to firewood, you're going to need a cant hook for sure. You're not going to need a pickaroon. That's optional. The log tongs, I would say, are optional, nice to haves. So I would say cant hook is a need, and then a pickaroon or hookaroon would be a nice to have, and the log tongs would be a nice to have. As far as vices, you do not need to have any vise that's portable. You could just bring your saws into your shop to sharpen them. You don't have to have a portable way to do it. Now, if you have a lot of land, you're going to be doing a lot of cutting on someone else's land that's remote, I would say for sure have the stump vise. It's easy. You could put it in your bag. You don't need to have anything.
So that's going to wrap it up for our video on what you need, what you want, and some things you don't want for splitting firewood and then dealing with wood in general.
So we've thrown a lot of different tools at you today. If you have any specific questions on anything we've shown that we didn't cover, whether you want more detail on, please leave it in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, friends.